Greetings in the name of the Lord. Let us continue our lesson titled The Importance of God's Words, particularly the subtopic titled Good Intentions Cannot Necessarily Please God. In part 7 of this lesson, we have studied that Christ condemned the traditions of men, even if that intention is for God. Christ called those who keep the words of God plus traditions of men as hypocrites. Christ was also clear that our worship becomes useless if we keep the doctrines of men. So we have to be very careful about the traditions of men that can never please God, even if the intention is good, that is, for God. In part 8 of this lesson, we are going to discuss a more or less similar situation that is found in the Old Testament. It is the Old Testament counterpart of what Christ taught in Matthew 15 verses 1 to 9. We have already discussed some background of the story in part 7, so we will continue the full discussion of the story in this video. I hope you will continue watching not only this video, but also the succeeding ones in the series. Let us now go back to 1 Samuel 15. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 2, we can read, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalekites for what they did in opposing the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt." The Lord wanted to punish the Amalekites for their sins, which were committed several years back. Before Moses died, he reminded the Israelites to blot out the memory of the Amalekites when the Israelites would have settled down in the promised land. In Deuteronomy 25 verses 17 to 18, we can read, "Remember what Amalek did to you on your journey out of Egypt, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary, and struck down all who lagged behind you. He did not fear God." The Amalekites ambushed the Israelites after they crossed the Red Sea. It was a sort of a national sin rather than an individual sin. God did not punish them immediately, but he promised to punish them eventually. Then in Deuteronomy 25 verse 19, we can read, "Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies on every hand, in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget." God planned to punish them in the future, and this future happened during the time of King Saul. Let us try to approximate the length of time that God gave to the Amalekites before he instructed Saul to punish them. The Amalekites attacked the Israelites right after they crossed the Red Sea, as we can read in Exodus 17, verses 8 to 16. The Israelites were in the wilderness for 40 years, as we can read in Acts 13, verse 18. After 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites lived in the Promised Land. We don't know how long they lived in the Promised Land before they asked for a king. When Saul was given the instruction to punish the Amalekites, he had reigned for 40 years already, as we can read in Acts 13 verse 21, because this happened a few days before Saul's reign ended. So it will be 40 years, plus some years before they asked for a king, plus 40 years during the reign of Saul. That is roughly around 100 years. Sometimes people complain about their evil neighbors, why God has not taken them. Let us just wait. God has his own timetable. In the Bible, we can read of God's punishment that happened on the very same day that the sin was committed. In the Old Testament times, we have the sons of Aaron, named Nadab and Abihu, who used a profane fire. They were killed right away, as we can read in Leviticus 10, verses 1 and 2. We also have the case of Uzzah, who put his hand on the ark to steady it because the oxen carrying the ark stumbled. Although Uzzah's intention was really good, God still put him to death, as we can read in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, verses 9 to 10. In the New Testament times, we have Ananias and Sapphira who lied about the price of the piece of land that they sold, as we can read in Acts 5, verses 1 to 10. They were killed when Peter verified their lies. It seems that God will punish right away if the sin is individual, but for a nation, it will take some time. But whether it is an individual or a nation, he will surely punish the sinners. So let us not think that God slumbers or sleeps. Everything is seen by God and is recorded. If we don't follow his words and follow the traditions of men, he is aware of that sin. So let's be careful. Let us now focus on the command of God to Saul as to what to do with the Amalekites. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 3 we can read, "Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey." Although the verse is quite long, the instruction can be summed up into two words, that is, kill all. God wanted Saul to kill all the Amalekites and their animals. Let us see how Saul complied with his command. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 4 we can read, So Saul summoned the people and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 soldiers of Judah. Let us do some math here to get the impact of the story. Saul sent 210,000 soldiers to destroy the Amalekites. If he sent 210,000 soldiers, is it possible to assume that the Amalekites were just 150,000 only? I think it is an overkill to do that. How about 210,000 Amalekites? I think it's not logical to have a 1-to-1 ratio because it means that a soldier could only kill one Amalekite and stop. How about 1:5 ratio? I think it is a conservative ratio. So if the ratio is 1:5, then the Amalekites will be around 1,050,000. Let's keep this number in mind because we will use this number later. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 5 we can read, Saul came to the city of the Amalekites and lay in wait in the valley. Saul started fulfilling his mission to kill all the Amalekites. He also ambushed them in the valley, just like what the Amalekites did to the Israelites in the past. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 6 we can read, Saul said to the Kenites, Go, leave, withdraw from among the Amalekites, or I will destroy you with them. For he showed kindness to all the people of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites withdrew from the Amalekites. This is something to think about. The Kenites were saved physically because they were good to the Israelites. Saul gave a chance to the Kenites who live among the Amalekites to live and be spared. They were kind to the Israelites, not like the Amalekites. This tells us that God really knows his people and will always give them a chance to escape from his punishment of the wicked, as we can read in 2 Peter 2 verse 9. But we have to act on what we believe, not just believing it or relying on faith alone. The Kenites believed it and left, and they were spared. Let us continue our study on how Saul complied with the command of God. In 1 Samuel 15 verses 7 to 8 we can read, Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. He took King Agag of the Amalekites alive, but utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. We do not know why he spared the king. Maybe Saul knew how to play chess, or the game chess was patterned after this incident. But let us think about his obedience. Let us now use the number that I asked you earlier to keep in mind. If there were around 1,050,000 Amalekites, sparing one is very negligible. His error was 0.000095% only, very small. It was very much within the common 5% margin of error in statistics. So ordinarily, we call this insignificant. But is it really insignificant in the eyes of God? We will see later. Let's proceed to the next verse. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 9 we can read, Saul and the people spared Agag, the best of the sheep and of the cattle, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was valuable, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they utterly destroyed. Aside from sparing the king, they also spared the best of the animals. What could be their plan for the best of the animals that they spared? Some of the possible plans are 1. To raise them because they were of good quality. 2. To sell them because they were of good quality, thus sellable. And 3. To slaughter them for their victory party. What was really their plan? We will know their plan later in this video. We have to note on the two important characteristics that we can get out of their actions. The first is quality. They spared the best of the animals. The second is quantity. They spared many animals, not just a few. These two characteristics are essential, quality and quantity. We will keep these two characteristics in mind and we will discuss them later in this video. Again, Saul complied with God's instruction to kill all the Amalekites, but he spared the king. His error was very negligible. Was God happy with the kind of obedience that Saul had? Let us now see how God felt about Saul's almost 100% obedience. In 1 Samuel 15 verses 10 to 11 we can read, The word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me, and has not carried out my commands. Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all night. It is very clear that God was not happy with Saul's almost 100% obedience. God even regretted for having made Saul king of Israel. Even Prophet Samuel was not happy. I hope we will learn some important lessons from this passage. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 12 we can read, Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, and Samuel was told, Saul went to Carmel where he set up a monument for himself, and on returning he passed on down to Gilgal. Prophet Samuel immediately tried to meet Saul. This action tells us about the urgency of the situation. But Saul set up a monument for himself. This means that Saul believed that he was able to comply with what God commanded him to do. We have to note that monuments are normally set up in honor of someone who is already dead. Setting up a monument for oneself while alive is a sign of overconfidence that he or she has accomplished something great. Saul's confidence was manifested when he met Samuel. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 13 we can read, When Samuel came to Saul, Saul said to him, May you be blessed by the Lord. I have carried out the command of the Lord. Saul blessed Samuel and claimed that he already complied with what the Lord required him to do. In Saul's eyes, he complied with what God commanded him to do, but in God's eyes, he has not complied with it. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 14 we can read, But Samuel said, What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears and the lowing of cattle that I hear? We have to remember that God commanded him to kill the Amalekites and their animals, as we can read in 1 Samuel 15 verse 3. The sound of the animals was a concrete proof that Saul failed to comply with what God commanded him to do. Let us ponder on this matter. Saul was confident in his own eyes that he had fulfilled what God commanded him to do. But in God's eyes, Saul failed to do what God commanded him to do. How about the people in general? How many people believe that they are doing the will of God and are thinking that they are going to heaven because they are already saved? Is it not possible that many of these people fail to do the will of God and are bound for hell? How do we know that we are doing the will of God and are bound for heaven? Let's continue studying the Word of God to see whether or not we are really doing the will of God, not our will or the will of men. Let us study carefully the words of God to see whether or not we are truly bound for heaven as we are thinking. So stay tuned for the upcoming videos and let us see more of God's words and examine our real score before God. Let us now see what was the very purpose why Saul and his people spared the best of the animals. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 14, Samuel asked Saul why there were noisy animals. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 15, we can read, Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God, but the rest we have utterly destroyed. So, according to Saul, they would sacrifice them to the Lord. This is a noble intention. But would God be happy now because they did not spare the best of the animals for themselves, but for God? Before we check whether or not God would be happy, let us remember the two important characteristics that I wanted you to remember earlier. They were the quality and quantity. They spare the best, that is quality, of the animals, that is quantity. These two characteristics are important. For a sacrifice to be acceptable to God, it must be with quality and in quantity. Let's study what happened to Cain and Abel's offering. In Genesis 4 verse 3 we can read, In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground. Please note that Cain brought an offering to the Lord from his harvest, and there's no mention about quality and quantity. In Genesis 4 verse 4 we can read, And Abel for his part brought the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering. Please note that Abel offered the firstlings of his flock. Firstlings normally signify quality, because first fruits normally are of good quality, just like the first fruits of bananas. Succeeding harvests of bananas dwindle in quality. Firstlings also signify quantity, because it is plural. In Genesis 4 verse 5 we can read, But for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. God rejected the offering of Cain, but accepted the offering of Abel. It is not because Cain offered the harvest of his land, while Abel offered animals. Both harvests of the land and animals were acceptable to God, and he required the Israelites to offer from the harvest of the land and from animals. What could be the reason for accepting Abel's offering? If Abel offered with quality and quantity, he must have something within him that made him offer it to God without thinking of losing them or wasting them. In the New Testament writings, we will find what did Abel have that made him offer to God something with quality and in quantity. In Hebrews 11 verse 4 we can read, "By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks." It was the faith of Abel that made him offer to God with quality and in quantity. He strongly believed that it was not a waste to offer with quality and in quantity to God. Let us take note of the phrase more excellent sacrifice. This is quality. Let us also take note of the phrase God testifying of his gifts. Gifts signify quantity. Many Bible teachers teach that righteousness by faith is found in the New Testament only. They failed to realize that righteousness by faith started even during the time of Cain and Abel. Let us remember that because of faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than Cain. Because of this act that was done by faith, he obtained witness that he was righteous, as can be read in Hebrews 11 verse 4. I would say that righteousness is always by faith throughout history, even in the Old Testament times. During the Old Testament times, we know that no one is justified by keeping the law. How can Moses, David, Hezekiah, etc. be justified? If they had faith, they would offer what God prescribed to be offered for their sins, and they will be covered by the blood of Christ, as can be read in Hebrews 9:15. If they did not have faith, they would not offer them because it would be a loss or a waste to offer their animals. Again, I have already discussed about the kind of offering that is acceptable to God, an offering with quality and in quantity. Abel practiced it because of his faith in God, and because of that, he was considered righteous before God, as can be read in Hebrews 11 verse 4 and Genesis 4 verse 4. That was what Saul and his men did. They spared the best, that is quality, of the animals, that is quantity, to sacrifice to the Lord, as can be read in 1 Samuel 15 verse 15. Since Saul and his men met the characteristics of God's acceptable sacrifice, will God be happy already? Before we check for the answer to that question, let us see how does God feel if we don't give him the best. The Israelites, particularly the priests, once committed something not acceptable to God. In Malachi 1 verse 6 we can read, "A son honors his father, and a servant fears his master. If then I am a father, where is the honor due to me? And if I am a master, where is the reverence due to me? So says the Lord of hosts to you, O priest, who despise his name." But you ask, how have we despised your name? In Malachi 1 verse 7, we can read the answer. By offering polluted food on my altar. Then you ask, how have we polluted it? By saying, the table of the Lord may be slighted. Slighted means that you can offer anything you like, not mindful of the quality. Then God challenged the priest if they could answer him positively. In Malachi 1 verse 8, we can read, when you offer a blind animal for sacrifice, is this not evil? When you offer the lame or the sick, is it not evil? Present it to your governor. See if he will accept it or welcome you, says the Lord of hosts. Definitely, they could not answer God positively. No, the governor will not be happy if we offer him animals with defect. Even to our loved ones, we always think of the best. If we give the best to our governor, how much more to the King of Kings? God is not a beggar that we give him the least that we can give. He owns our life, our job, our health, and everything we enjoy. As a token of gratitude, we need to give God the best, that is quality, and bountifully, that is quantity. And definitely, we will live with him happily throughout eternity eventually. So, what Saul and his men did was right. That is, sparing the best of the animals to sacrifice to the Lord. Moreover, we know that God required animal sacrifices during their time. If Saul and his men did it during the New Testament times, then it is very obvious that it was not acceptable. Can we conclude now that God was happy with what Saul and his men did? In 1 Samuel 15 verse 16 we can read, Then Samuel said to Saul, Stop, I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. He replied, Speak. The word stop signals that something is wrong. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 17 we can read, Samuel said, "Though you are little in your own eyes, are you not the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel." Samuel reminded Saul that even if he was not worthy of the kingship, God made him king. Then in 1 Samuel 15 verse 18 we can read, "And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go, utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed." God's command was simple. It was to kill all the Amalekites and their animals. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 19 we can read, "Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" It is very clear that the command was simple, that is, utterly destroy all the Amalekites. It is also clear from the statement of Samuel that Saul did not obey the voice of the Lord. We know that Saul spared the king. This mistake accounts for about 0.000095% only, as shown in the screen. It was very negligible, but according to Samuel, Saul did not obey the voice of the Lord. As for the spoil, the best of the animals that they spared to sacrifice to the Lord, it is clear that they did evil in the sight of God in doing so, as mentioned in 1 Samuel 15 verse 19. How come? Their intention was good. They complied with the characteristics of an acceptable sacrifice to God, that is, with quality and in quantity. What was wrong? It was because they did something that God did not require them to do, and they disobeyed God of His command, that is, to kill them all. Let us continue our study on how Saul obeyed God's command to kill the Amalekites and their animals. According to Samuel, Saul still disobeyed the Lord. When they sacrificed the best of the animals to God, it was still evil in the sight of God, as can be read in 1 Samuel 15 verse 19. Now, Saul will explain further. Let us see whether or not we can argue before God and expect to win the argument. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 20 we can read, "Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought back Agag, the king of the Amalek, and I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites." Saul insisted that he really obeyed the voice of the Lord by going out where God sent him. He obeyed approximately 99.999905% as shown in the screen. And in 1 Samuel 15 verse 21 we can read, "But from the spoil the people took sheep and cattle, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal." He insisted that the best of the animals were spared to sacrifice to the Lord. If God were a man, maybe he would say, okay, I'll forgive you for that because you spared them to sacrifice to me. You did not spare them for yourselves to enjoy." But God is not like a man that he can be bribed. Let's see whether or not God is like a man. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 22 we can read, "And Samuel said, Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obedience to the voice of the Lord? Surely to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." This is something for us to think about. God is happier if we obey His words rather than to sacrifice to Him. But sad to say, people are allergic to obedience because for them obedience means work, and we are not justified by works. They just misunderstood what Paul meant by the phrase, "It is not from works, so that no one may boast," found in Ephesians 2 verse 9. We will explain this clearly in the future video of my series of lessons. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 23 we can read, "For rebellion is no less a sin than divination, and stubbornness is like iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, He has also rejected you from being king." This verse tells us that if we are stubborn, it is the same as committing idolatry. The word stubbornness is rendered arrogance in the New American Bible Revised Edition, as shown on the screen. So if we are arrogant enough to go against God's will, we are sinning against Him. The New American Bible renders it as presumption, as shown on the screen. If we presume that it is all right even if God has not prescribed it, then we are also sinning against God. Saul presumed that it was okay to spare the best of the animals to sacrifice to the Lord. It was because God did not command him to do so. I hope we will be guided by the lessons that we can get from the mistakes of Saul and his men. Take note, God removed the kingship from Saul despite his 99.999905% obedience. God rejected him as king even if they spared the best of the animals to sacrifice to the Lord as a token of gratitude for the victory that God has given them. So far, God was not happy with Saul's 99.999905% obedience. Despite the offering of the best of the animals, still God was not pleased. Rather than arguing or explaining to God our mistakes, let us just obey His will. In 1 Samuel 15 verse 24, we can read, Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I fear the people and obey their voice. Acknowledging our fault is the best thing to do rather than explaining to God our reasons for disobedience. We cannot expect to win our argument. We have to note that Saul said, I fear the people and obeyed their voice. This reason is not acceptable to God. If we read the entire story, God did not restore the kingship to Saul because he feared the people. Let us learn from this. Based on my experience, many of my students of the Bible wanted to obey Christ, but they could not obey Him because they feared their relatives, family members, peers, etc. They forgot what Christ said in Matthew 10 verse 28 where He said, do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear Him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Definitely, God will not rescue us from hell if we disobeyed Him because we fear the people around us. What else can we learn from the story? One important lesson could be partial obedience is still disobedience. Another could be good intentions cannot please God if we disobey His command. This is one of the reasons that there are many religious groups today. They introduce a lot of human teachings and justify them that they did them for God. Another important lesson is obedience is better than sacrifice. Still another could be we cannot argue with God and expect to win the argument. You can add more to the list, but these are enough for us to think about our standing before God. After learning some important lessons from the story of Saul and his men, let us be inspired to know more about His words and His will. I hope you will desire to watch more of my series of videos. In part 9 of this lesson, we will learn that lack of knowledge is very dangerous. We will also learn how important our knowledge of God's words is in order to have a right relationship with God. We will also learn that the enthusiastic efforts of many professing Christians are totally useless if they lack knowledge of the true words of God in the Bible. In part 9 of this lesson, we will also discuss that we cannot add to or subtract from His words. If we add something to God's words, normally we automatically subtract from God's words. God hates adding or subtracting to His words, that even the apostles or angels have to be accursed if they teach beyond what is written in the Bible. I hope you will also watch it when it is already available. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have learned some very important truth, and I hope that you will share this to your loved ones, friends, and acquaintances.